Hello and welcome to Season 1 of the Dice Throne Podcast. I'm Jared and I use the pronouns he, him.
I'm Amy, I use she, her pronouns, and today we are going to be taking a quick look at all of the Marvel heroes and just some general surface level thoughts on them. But before we go into that, we should probably talk about what happened at the last podcast. So, for those of you who were around back then, I did do a Dice Throne podcast in May of 2020. I went by AJ back then, and I brought various other people to do the podcast with. That failed after about 8 or so episodes because I burned out. Those previous episodes are going to be labeled as Season 0, so they are still available for you to watch, but they are older and the format is way different. This is Episode 1 of Season 1. So with me, and who's going to be with me for all of the other episodes, I have Jared. Jared, can you introduce yourself a bit?
Yeah, so like I said, my name's Jared. I'm a big fan of Dice Throne. I got into it about a year ago. And it's a lot of fun. I'm kind of a casual player at heart, but I listen to Amy's podcast, and I happen to be a podcaster myself. I do a show called Level With Us, where we talk about video games week by week. And I reached out to Amy about restarting this podcast because I found a lot of her advice on some of the more complex heroes really helpful for my game, and I'm aspiring to be a little more competitive in my games. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with Dice Throne. It's basically going to be me and the expert on this show. So
I wouldn't necessarily call myself an expert, but I have played competitively. I also run the Dice Throne homebrew community, but we are going to keep the topic of homebrews out of the podcast just for easiness sake. The last thing we should mention is, one thing we wanted to do for this podcast was do more than just talk theoretical strategy. So every other episode, we're actually going to play a game of Dice Throne via this podcast. So the next episode will be a game, the episode after that will be strategy, so on and so forth. So we will actually be playing a game over Discord. We will tell you all of our dice rolls, and we'll go through all of our actions, so you'll be able to follow along. And additionally, you are going to be observing the game through my lens. So every once in a while, I'm going to mute myself in Discord and tell you what cards are in my hand or what strategy I'm going for without Jared being able to hear me.
basically, Amy is going to, every now and then, as an aside, be like, okay, this is how we're going to destroy Jared. First, step 1, etc., etc.
Yeah. Yeah, and we have specifically picked these matchups to be matchups that are interesting in Dice Throne, also matchups that appear a lot in competitive play. So hopefully you will get some useful information out of that, the most important thing being we're going to talk all this theoretical strategy, but now you'll actually be able to see it applied.
That's right. Yeah, so it'll be a bit of an experiment, but we'll see how it goes. I think it's also worth mentioning what our mains are, since people are getting to know us right now. I favor the Cursed Pirate. I don't think I'm particularly good at her, but I really like all of her attacks, and so I'm hoping Amy will kind of coach me a bit and teach me some of the ins and outs, like when to flip the board and stuff like that. What are your mains in Dice Throne?
I have 3 mains. I have Shadow Thief, Treant, and Thor, most recently. So we are going to do an episode on Thor because I literally picked him up like 2 days ago and started actually figuring out what I'm supposed to be doing. So, let's get into our main topic, which is we're going to talk about the Marvel Dice Throne Kickstarter, and we're going to talk about all the heroes. So first, Jared, any general thoughts on the Marvel Kickstarter? What was your reaction when you heard that Marvel Dice Throne was a thing?
Yeah, so when I got notified via YouTube that they hadn't announced any heroes yet, but when I saw the announcement, I was like, oh, good for them. Like, that's cool. They got a cool license. Like, it fit. I'm not, like, particularly attached to Marvel, but I was like, oh, no, that's cool. But once they actually started revealing the heroes and I got to start looking at their player boards, I got really excited because I think some of these mechanics are really interesting and fascinating and, kind of do things that previous heroes didn't. I'm curious what your reaction was as well, as someone who comes from a little more competitive background.
So, so I followed along with all of the puzzle shenanigans that were happening. For those of you who are unaware, a little while before the announcement was dropped, one of the members of the Dice Throne team started posting puzzles. There was one puzzle for each of the 16 existing heroes, and then you had to take a letter as part of the answer from all 16 of those puzzles, and then put them all into a 17th puzzle. And if you solve the 17th puzzle and put the correct answer into the Dice Throne website, then you got the announcement early. So I followed along. I got the announcement early. I am a little bit of a Marvel fangirl, so I was quite excited to see that. Mostly just excited for the developers because, getting a license with Marvel was pretty huge. And just like Jared, as the heroes started getting revealed more and more, I was getting very, very interested in the mechanics and play styles and figuring out which heroes I would play, and maybe try to play competitively. And so the two heroes I really wanted to see, though I was kind of thinking that both of them were kind of a stretch, were Loki and Doctor Strange. So when the Kickstarter dropped, revealing the last two heroes to be Loki and Doctor Strange, I think I literally jumped up and down. That was quite exciting for me.
That's awesome.
So yeah, let's move on to our first hero, Captain Marvel. So Captain Marvel is a Complexity 2 hero. She was the first hero that was revealed for Marvel Dice Throne. Her main focus is that she's an offensive hero with the ability to do large amounts of damage, but her defense is also pretty good. So her main drive is her status effect Cosmic Ray. It works similarly to the Shadow Thief's sneak attack, except you get to roll 2 dice and pick one of them and add that much damage. So if I'm not mistaken, that increases the amount of damage you're doing per Cosmic Ray by 1.5 on average. The downside is that you can't gain Cosmic Ray. You can't spend Cosmic Ray on the same turn you gain it. However, it has a stack limit of 2, so that's not really much of a problem. The other thing is that her defense rolls 4 dice, but it only deals or prevents damage on 6s, and in fact it does both. It deals 1 damage and prevents 1 damage per 6 you roll, but it doesn't do either of those things if you don't roll any 6s. However, she does have a status effect called Radiance, which lets her change lets her change one of her dice rolled during her defensive roll phase to a 6. So, Jared, any thoughts on Captain Marvel?
Yeah, I'll be honest, this is the one that kind of excited me the least. I don't care much for the hero herself, but also I was kind of hoping there'd be something a little more interesting here. But that being said, the status effects all look pretty interesting. I feel like Cosmic Ray is something that, I don't know. I could be wrong, correct me if I'm incorrect here, but I feel like Cosmic Ray is something you're going to want to constantly be receiving since you can't spend it right away.
Yep, so...
and just keep the damage rolling.
So the Captain Marvel's dice... Captain Marvel's a 3-2-1 dice anatomy, and her board roll objectives look very similar to the Tactician's, but with one main difference. Her middle, bottom, left ability, Aurora Wave, requires 2 photons, 1 wing, and 2 bursts. Instead of 3 photons and 2 bursts. So it makes I think it actually makes it a little easier. But getting Aurora Wave and getting your Large Straight are the 2 easiest ways to get Cosmic Ray. And your Large Straight does undefendable damage, which is even better.
That's cool. What's your opinion of the defense?
So if you don't roll any 6s, then there's a decent chance that you roll 2 wings, in which case you get a Cosmic Flare, which will add either 1, 2, or 3 damage, depending on how many Cosmic Flare tokens you already have. Or it'll add 0 if you already stack limit, but that's unlikely. So if you don't have Radiance, it's not terrible. But if you do have Radiance, it obviously becomes a lot better. When you upgrade Energy Refraction, you roll 5 dice instead of 4, which is obviously better. Yeah. The one thing with Captain Marvel is she has a lot of undefendable damage. She has her Large Straight, as I said. She has her Mini Ultimate, which isn't horribly surprising. But she also has Inner Light, which is her equivalent of Carpet Bomb or Sturdy Blow. It gives you Radiance and does 4 pure damage, which is really good. Considering that the Barbarian's Sturdy Blow does 4 undefendable damage but doesn't give stats effects. And Captain Marvel's defense isn't too much worse than the Barbarian's, but I'm not one to judge.
Yeah, she's definitely one I'll have to, actually, I haven't been on TTS, but I definitely will have to play her a few times and kind of get a feel for her.
I have been on TTS. I will say you get the hang of her pretty quickly. You're just going for big damage. It's kind of the joy of Captain Marvel. You get to look at big numbers. Let's move on to Black Panther. Black Panther is the second hero that was announced. He is also Complexity 2. His whole thing is revolving around kinetic energy, which is a status effect that he gains passively whenever he gets successfully dealt damage for any reason except for an opponent's ultimate. He can also gain kinetic energy through his own abilities. For every 2 kinetic energy tokens he has, he increases all of his attack damage by 1. And as soon as he hits 8 kinetic energy, he bursts, removing all kinetic energy tokens, and then he gains 2 CP, draws 2 cards, and deals 5 isolated damage to a chosen opponent. Black Panther doesn't have too much going on other than that, but his kinetic energy is quite devastating, especially since he can gain kinetic energy through his own will, and use it to time powerful attacks. So, any thoughts on Black Panther?
Yeah, I actually am quite excited for him. I wasn't at first. I thought it looked pretty basic, but just the idea of balancing that kinetic energy stack so that you're hitting with enhanced attacks, but then getting ready to burst. My assumption is whenever you get to do that burst, it's probably the best feeling ever. Because you just get all the goodies, you get all the nice things.
The 5 damage is cool and all, but I'm honestly more interested in the 2 cards. That's
gaining
2 CP and drawing 2 cards on top of the damage, and just being able to do all of that without needing to, forfeit your offensive roll phase or pay any additional cost like that is insane.
That sounds really... I just bet it feels so satisfying to pull off. And I think when you upgrade his passive... you can actually burst at 7 energy instead of 8?
So his passive costs 0 CP, and then it reduces his kinetic energy stack limit by 1, so he bursts at 7.
That's cool. I like that.
Yep. So, Black Panther was actually the hero I was least excited about, because it didn't seem like there was too much strategy in the kinetic energy. But then I played him, and then I realized there was a pretty good amount of strategy. The one thing I was kind of eyeing suspiciously is that his defense is, in fact, terrible. You roll 3 dice, and you do 1 damage back per slash you roll, which is, not very great. But the one cool thing about his board is that he has an ability called Triple Threat, which has a new roll objective that we've never seen before. It's 2 slashes, 2 vibranium, and 1 panther. It doesn't seem that great on paper, but if you it does 6 damage unless you roll 2 dice. If you roll vibranium, you get 2 kinetic energy, which is pretty good. But if you roll panther, you draw a card. So this kind of cements Black Panther as an offensive hero with economy tendencies, because he gets to draw 2 cards every time he bursts, and now he also has this fairly consistent source of card draw in the form of Triple Threat. So Black Panther is going to be getting a good number of cards, and since he can draw both Not This Time and another card in his deck, which lets him prevent damage, his defense isn't as bad as it seems. In fact, multiple times against playing Black Panther, I have gone for a giant swing in order to kill him. But then he played Not This Time and Vibing, and prevented 12 damage before rolling defense, and that didn't really go well.
Well, that must have been lucky, because I kind of felt like his defense wasn't great either, and to me that means you have to really rely on getting those vibranium suits, but they look pretty hard to come by. I almost wish instead of preventing 3 damage, they prevented half damage or something to ensure that you're still getting your kinetic energy. But what are your thoughts on that unique status effect?
The one thing is that the one card you can see in the preview of Black Panther is a card called Vibin. It costs 1 CP, and it says discard vibranium suit to prevent 6 damage. So that's kind of the thing you're going for, is once you draw that card, you just chase Heart-Shaped Herb. So you get 3 kinetic energy, and then you get a vibranium suit to prevent 6 damage. Since most heroes deal a little over 7 damage on average every turn, preventing 6 damage basically negates the amount of health differential they get from their attack, considering you are now doing +1 damage on your next attack with the 3 kinetic energy you got. So, I don't want to get too far into strategy, but Black Panther is cool. Even though he is the hero I'm least interested in trying to nail down. So, next up, let's move on to Miles Morales' Spider-Man. Miles Morales' Spider-Man is a complexity 2. Yes, he is a complexity 2. So, Spider-Man's whole thing revolves around combo tokens. You can spend a combo token after your opponent's defensive roll phase has concluded, and if you do, you target the same opponent with an additional offensive roll phase, but you can only do that once per turn, or else it's ridiculously broken. So Spider-Man's whole thing revolves around basically getting to attack twice per turn, as long as he can get a combo token every turn, which isn't terribly hard.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Amy.
Go ahead.
So, to me, combo does sound really cool, but in some ways it sounds like a worse version of stun. Would you disagree with that? Is the difference between them that just combo is easier to get than stun?
Yeah,
or what do you think?
Of course, combo is definitely easier to get. The one thing is that instead of being stunned, which is a negative status effect. Okay, well I guess the big difference is you don't have to use combo immediately. If you inflict stun, you are getting an additional offensive roll phase during the same turn. But if you get combo, you can choose to hold on to it and then use it in a future turn, which might be beneficial. But at the same time, it might leave your opponent open to playing Get That Out of Here and removing it, and then you feel sad.
Oh, yeah.
So, or you can take advantage of that in DTA, maybe. Maybe you will gain combo, hold on to it, and then give it to another player via transference or something like that, and they can take advantage of it.
That's true. Huh.
Spider-Man also is the only Marvel hero and the second hero ever to have 2 defensive abilities. He's got a counterpunch defensive ability, which just does return damage, and it's just as bad as Black Panther's defense. But he also has another defensive ability called Spider Sense. He rolls 2 dice, and if he rolls a spider, which is his 6th face, he prevents half damage. And he can discard an invisibility token, which has a variety of uses all throughout his board, to take an additional roll attempt. So now you are basically rolling 4 dice in order to prevent half damage, which is pretty good. Any thoughts on Miles Morales Spider-Man?
I really like Miles Morales as a character, but this ended up kind of being the opposite for me compared to Black Panther, whereas with Black Panther, wasn't really interested, then started looking at him and was like, oh, he's actually really cool. Spider-Man, I was really excited, especially when I saw Combo, but I don't know, there's a couple things that I feel like I gotta have him in my hands to see if he really works, because, like I said, Combo kind of feels like a worse stun. Spider Sense kind of seems, his other defensive role, kind of seems like a worse version of Shadow Thief's second defense.
Well, so to be fair, the Shadow Thief is a 2-2-1-1 dice anatomy. All of the heroes we've talked about so far have
that is true.
2-2-1 dice anatomy. Shadow Thief is a 2-2-1-1, so it arguably might not be as consistent in terms of damage, but it also can inflict a poison, so it's probably better, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Well, but it still requires a 6, and you only get 2 dice for that. But but I don't know. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. I don't outright dislike him. I don't know. I want to see how quickly he can get those hits in, and how often he can combo before I, get a feel on my feelings for him.
Yep. The one thing is he has a status effect called Webbed, and he inflicts it on an opponent. And then the next turn, when he attacks them, the attack becomes undefendable, and then it gets removed, which is a pretty cool effect, because being able to make your attack undefendable when you're already getting 2 offensive roll phases a turn is quite significant, because it allows you to more consistently get in that above-average damage that you're doing. Additionally, one of his easiest ways to inflict Web is to get a straight, and his large straight also gives him a card. And a lot of his cards say spend invisibility to blah blah blah. Like one card that you can see in the preview is discard invisibility to prevent 3 damage after being attacked. So that kind of gives him a lot more versatility to use the invisibility token on, considering that the effect printed on the token isn't great.
I like its effect, but I don't think his defense is good enough to make it good.
Yeah. Also, his mini ultimate is really good. Gain invisibility and then deal 7 undefendable damage. That's really good damage. And invisibility seems to be valued decently highly, since he has a bunch of ways he can use it.
That sounds like a really good attack. It'd be good to save a combo for.
Yep, indeed. So let's move on to who is currently my Marvel Dice Throne main, because of TTS. Let's move on to Thor. So Thor's whole thing is he has a companion called Mjolnir, because Mjolnir's a companion now. He starts with Mjolnir on his hero board. He can discard Mjolnir at any time to throw or retrieve it. When he throws it, he puts it on an opponent's board, and he does 1 isolated damage to them. And when he retrieves it, he puts it back on his board, and then he gains electrokinesis, which I'll talk about in a second. He also has various effects on his board that let him throw or retrieve Mjolnir, and when he does so, he doesn't have to discard a card. He gets it for free. Electrokinesis, in particular, is a positive status effect. Some of his abilities do extra damage per electrokinesis you have, or you can spend 3 electrokinesis at any time to draw a card. Thor is generally advertised as an extremely offensive hero, but I disagree with that heavily. He's not an offensive hero, he's an economy hero. He can spend 3 electrokinesis at any time to draw a card. So you can bet he's going to be drawing the cards, and since he's getting a bunch of cards from that, as well as some other effects that give him CP or extra card draw, and some extra cards in his deck some character-specific cards that give him economy, he's going to get to his Twice as Wild and So Wild and his really good cards, which means he gets to activate his ultimate, and his ultimate does 16 damage, which is kind of where the offensive part of it comes in, but in reality, it's a bunch of damage that's being derived from an economy-based hero. So that is my 2 cents. I think when you think of Thor as more an economy-based hero than an offensive hero, that's when you really start succeeding. Because my first couple of games with Thor, I tried going for big damage and whatnot, and I failed miserably, and then I died. So once that moment of realization kind of clicks for you, you can start actually doing significant things. The other cool thing about Thor is, well, it's not cool, it's kind of funny, is if you do an attack with Thor and you just barely fail to kill your opponent, like you get them down to 2 health, well, you can discard a card to throw Mjolnir at them, and then discard a card to retrieve it, and discard a card to throw it again. So you can just cheap shot them by discarding your entire hand and poking them with Mjolnir until they drop to 0 health. And there's not much they can do about it. So, it's kind of funny, kind of cruel.
Would you say that those electrokinesises are mainly there for the card draw?
Like, I would say so, yes, because the only 2 abilities that are getting modified by your electrokinesis are Odin Force, which is already giving you electrokinesis, and your mini ultimate, which, it's fair, but yeah. I would say it's almost always worth it to spend them immediately to draw a card, especially if it's like during your main phase or something, and you think you could use the card to get rid of a stats effect or something.
Okay, so you would say that this card draw is more about the cards themselves than it is throwing Mjolnir? Because that was the first thing I thought. I was like, oh, you draw extra cards so you can throw Mjolnir more, but I guess it makes more sense.
Yeah, discarding a card to do 1 damage is usually not as good as like actually playing the card for its effect.
Right, yeah, that makes sense.
Especially considering that another one of Thor's strengths is his character-specific cards are really, really good, but I'm not going to get into that right now. That is for the Thor episode that we are going to definitely eventually do. Any quick thoughts on Thor?
Yeah, I really like him. I really like the look at him, and this is, again, from a very casual perspective. I'm just looking at these attacks, and I'm like, ooh, oh, that looks fun. There's a card or an attack or somewhere I read that there's, based on where Mjolnir is, whether it's on you or on them, that changes one of the effects of the attack.
There's actually 2 attacks that are like that, so Mighty Summon and a Small Straight Lightning Rod.
Right, so I really like the idea of like setting up yourself by like discarding a card to throw Mjolnir and then do the attack that does more, or that's enhanced because Mjolnir is there. That just sounds really fun, and the fact that you get a little metal zinc hammer to pass around to the player boards. It's wonderful. I love it.
I'm a fan of Thor's art as well. He's really awesome, and I like all the blues everywhere.
Yeah.
Alrighty, let's move on to the hero I am most excited about, Black Widow. So Black Widow is all about upgrades. She only has 7 upgrades in her deck. No, actually, I think she has 8.
She has 8.
I'm not actually sure. Okay. Yeah, I was gonna... She doesn't have, like, 10 upgrades like the Barbarian does.
No, she has 8, 1 for each spot.
Yep. So her whole thing is about playing these upgrades, and for every upgrade she plays, she gets a passive bonus. Some of her abilities do additional damage per upgrade ability, upgrade you have in play, and there are effects scattered throughout her board that become more effective once you have X number of upgrades in play. Like, for example, once you have 3 upgrades in play, your small straight does 7 damage instead of 5. She also starts the game with 3 covert ops tokens, and once she loses them, they're very, very hard to get back. They have two different effects you can go for. You can spend 1 during your main phase to get an upgrade from your hand into play for free, or you can spend 1 during your main phase to look at the top 3 cards of your deck. If you don't find an ability upgrade there, you can reveal those 3 cards. Then you search your deck for an upgrade, put it in your hand, and then shuffle your deck. If you do find an ability upgrade there, or you choose not to reveal the cards, then you can put the 3 cards back in any order that you choose. This basically means that if you do find an ability upgrade card there, you can just put it on the top of the deck, so you're just going to draw it during your next income phase anyways. So she also has a very cool effect called Time Bomb. It's a double-sided stat effect token, so it has a 2-side and a 1-side. Usually when you inflict it, it starts with the 2-side up, unless you have 6 upgrades in play, in which case your opponent is screwed, and you put it with the 1-side up. During your upkeep phase, if you have a Time Bomb, you have to roll a die. If you roll a 1 to 5, the Time Bomb ticks down by 1. If you roll a 6, it gets removed. And if the Time Bomb ticks down to 0, it explodes and you take 4 damage. So you can imagine that some craziness ensues once Black Widow has 6 upgrades in play. Let me just spell this out for you. So her large straight does 5 damage, but it does 7 damage instead if you have 3 ability upgrades in play. The small straight upgrade adds 1 damage to the ability, so if you have 3 ability upgrades in play, then you're doing 8 damage with that. But her passive also says if you have at least 5 ability upgrades in play, you add 1 damage to all of your attacks. So now it's doing 9 damage. And if you have 6 ability upgrades in play, the time bomb you also inflict goes with the 1 side up. So now you're doing 9 damage, and unless your opponent rolls a 6 during their next upkeep phase, they take an additional 4 damage. So now you're doing 13 damage with your large straight, which is kind of good. So Black Widow is all about scaling up and just getting the potential to fire off insane amounts of damage once she gets set up and once she has the economy to do so.
Oh, so many thoughts, but I'll try and keep it down since we want to stay under time here. I knew I'd get along with you well because Black Widow is the one I'm the most excited for as well. Mainly just because she is taking a mechanic that's already existed in Dice Throne and doing something new with it. And that makes me really excited.
I feel like competitively, a lot of people agree that late in the game, when you're about to die, drawing an ability upgrade is not the one thing you want to draw. But for Black Widow, it is the one thing you want to draw because it makes all your attacks
exactly, better. Yeah. In fact, abilities are usually something I dislike drawing most of the time. I'm usually all about the mitigation cards or, Vegas Baby, stuff like that. But with this character, it's just going to be exciting every time you draw one, which I think is really cool. And in addition to that, even if you're not playing super well and you're not reaching that win condition of stacking up lots of upgrades, I think those time bombs are super, super great. I think they will really add up over time as you inflict them. So, yeah, can't say enough good things about Black Widow. I think she's really interesting, really excited to play her.
I think if Black Widow lives up to how cool I think she's going to be, when I get my hands on her, I think I am going to main her.
Yeah, that's my goal right now. So we'll have to do a mirror match.
Alrighty, let's move on to Scarlet Witch. So Scarlet Witch is the control hero of this set of heroes. So, actually, let's go back to Black Widow for a second. I forgot to mention there's one really, really weird thing about Black Widow that you might not have noticed. I'm going to talk about her dice anatomy. So again, all of the heroes that we've talked about so far have had a 3-2-1 dice anatomy. Black Widow has a 2-3-1 dice anatomy, which is a first for Dice Throne. So I think someone mentioned doing a 2-3-1 dice anatomy would be a cool idea, but I said that doesn't do anything. It doesn't affect the game at all. And now it seems I've been proven wrong, considering that the official team has made a hero with a 2-3-1 dice anatomy. And now that I'm looking at it, it actually does make a difference, because her basic attack uses the 3s instead of the 2s. So her 3s, 4s, and 5s are what fuel her basic attack.
Yeah,
this actually makes her straights very powerful, because if you get a 3, 4, 5 in an attempt to get your small or large straight, and you fail, you have a basic attack. This means that going for straights is far less risky, and therefore far more effective, which is good, because her straights seem to be the main source of her scaling damage showing up over time. So that is something very cool and very interesting, and I'm glad, and I'm going to be very interested to see the ramifications of a new dice anatomy. But yeah, I totally forgot to mention that. Let's move on to Scarlet Witch. So Scarlet Witch has got a 3-1-1-1 dice anatomy, similar to the Pyromancer and the Seraph. So her whole thing is that she has 4 different status effects, and they all do very different things, and they're all very dangerous. And she inflicts and gains all 4 of them all over the place. So she just does weird stuff, and it's kind of hard for the opponent to pay attention to all of it.
Yeah, can we spotlight the reality warp? I think that's going to be a big game changer. I don't know. It seems like one of the worst effects in the entire game to have on yourself, because it's almost like losing a die.
Yeah.
I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I'm just going to go through all 4 of the stat effects. So probability manipulation, you can spend it to change an even number die to an odd number die. So if you have 4, you can change it to a 3 or a 5, which is pretty cool. It's very helpful for getting straights. And then you have Reality Warp, which is the one that Jared wants to talk about so much. So if you have Reality Warp at the start of your offensive roll phase, Scarlet Witch takes one of your dice, throws it out the window, and replaces it with one of her own. So now you can't use the symbols on the 5th die, but you can still use the numbers if you're going for straights. And then all of that gets reset at the end of your offensive roll phase, and the token gets removed.
And I think you need to go for straights at that point, because it's going to be pretty hard to hit some of your attacks otherwise.
Yeah, I think if you're playing Shadow Thief and you get 4 bags after doing that, you're probably going to just accept that, especially if it's early in the game. And I don't think you would want to accept it if it's late in the game. But yeah, going for straight seems like your best bet. Obviously, you can't get your ultimate. If you're playing Huntress, you can't get Predatory Advance. If you're playing Barbarian, you can't get Overpower, so it does lock out a good number of options. It reminds me of Hex from DTA, in that it's kind of fun to just think about all the different ramifications the status effect has, and how many edge cases it just destroys something. And speaking of things destroying things, let's talk about Conjure. Conjure is Scarlet Witch's third status effect. It has two. You can spend it for one of two different things. You can either inflict reality warp, which is already a lot of fun, or you can spend it during your main phase to gain a positive status effect from a chosen player's leaflet, or your opponent can discard a card of their choice to prevent this. Which is very helpful because a lot of heroes have surprisingly really, really good positive status effects. Looking at you, Paladin.
Like combo, yeah. Oh, yeah, Paladin too.
Yeah, combo, Paladin, Shadows. You've got a lot of good options depending on your matchup. And then finally, there's Crackle. Crackle is basically an attack modifier token, so you can spend it after attacking, and you add 1 damage per positive or negative status effect on your board, excluding the Crackle you just spent, up to a maximum of 3. The stack limit for Crackle is 3, but you can only spend up to 2 per turn. And that's kind of where Scarlet Witch's late-game strategy comes in. She has all these really good status effects, and most of them are positive, but now you can pick up Crackle, and if Crackle works out exactly as you plan, it's going to add 6 damage onto an attack. And Scarlet Witch isn't
ludicrous.
The Scarlet Witch isn't the best at undefendable damage, but, adding 6 damage is nothing to sneeze at.
That's really cool.
Yes. I'd like to highlight 2 things about her board. There's a lot of really weird stuff on here, but let me highlight Jinx first. So, this is something I almost missed when I looked at Scarlet Witch the first time. So, Jinx says deal 6 damage and roll 2 dice. It has a variety of effects, but if you roll a 6 during this dice roll, you add 1 damage and then roll the die again. Which means that Scarlet Witch is one of the few heroes in Dice Throne that has the potential to kill her opponent on the first turn. Even though the odds of doing so are infinitesimally unlikely, it's still a thing that can happen. Especially if you...
Wait, how so?
So if you roll 6 on Jinx, you add a damage and then re-roll that die. So if you roll it and then you get another 6, and then you get another 6, if you do that 50 times, then you win. The other thing is her defense, which is called Double Trouble. It's a very fitting name, really. You roll 5 dice, but you only get effects if you roll 2 of the same symbol. Double Trouble, in particular, doesn't seem all that great, because it only really gives status effects unless you roll 2 6s, in which case it does 4 return damage, which is quite significant. I've been told the upgrade for Double Trouble is very powerful as well, but I haven't actually seen it myself, so we will leave that up to suspense. Any thoughts on Scarlet Witch?
No, not much. She does look a little overwhelming to me. There's a lot of status effects, a lot of attacks. Her dice anatomy is not the most user-friendly for early players, newcomers to the game.
We swear under our breath at this dice anatomy. It's very hard to work with.
Right. But that being said, I did enjoy watching Manny play her in the Friday Night Fights, I believe is what it was called. He did some pretty cool things with her, and I'm overwhelmed, but I'm excited. So
already 7 minutes over. Let's go to Doctor Strange. So Doctor Strange is the weird hero of the season. He's got a passive called the Book of Vishanti. He starts the game with a spell card placed on the Book of Vishanti. He's also got a bunch of other spell cards in his deck, which all have various effects. Once per turn during his main phase, Doctor Strange can prepare one of these spells from his hand. When he does that, he puts it on his Book of Vishanti, and he gets the Prefer effect, which is like a chosen opponent loses 1 CP, or heal 1, or gain a status effect, or something like that. Additionally, he has some effects on his board, like, say, his Small Straight, which let him cast a spell. And when he casts a spell, it has a variety of much better effects, like adding 3 damage to an attack or healing 3. Usually, when you cast a spell, it gets discarded, unless you cast the spell you started with, in which case it goes back in your hand, but that spell only adds 1 damage. So, Doctor Strange has all of these fancy spell cards in his deck, and he's also got 3 more stats effects. So, he's got a lot to work with. Here. Definitely easily the most complex hero, but also the newest one. So, any thoughts? Also, I should mention, Doctor Strange is a 2-2-1-1 dice anatomy, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but also, we all know how Paladin goes. Doctor Strange has no basic attack, and he's a passive, and we all know how that goes. That results in one of the lead designers going on a rant about how hard the hero is to roll for during a DTA stream, not based on a real example.
Paladin is tough for sure, and I'm sure Doctor Strange will be the same way. But those spells, man, those spells, I am so excited for them.
I should have mentioned, in terms of Doctor Strange's difficulty, he has an ability called Astral Incursion, which requires 1 of every symbol, and it has been proven via Paladin's Requital that this role objective is surprisingly
That's
easy.
true.
You've seen it on 3111 heroes, but it's even easier here since the dice are more spread out. So that role objective is not very hard, but also you can't really force it.
Right, yeah. I guess the only other thing I would say is that originally I thought the Book of Ashanti, I thought you had to, when you cast those spells, I thought you had to like do them in order of the stack, and so you had to really be careful about like, yeah, I thought you had to be careful about which order, but turns out, no, you just get this nice little stack that you can open up and fan out and be like, which one am I going to play first? And hopefully there are some that really synergize with your strategy. So, yeah, Doctor Strange will be fun.
Also, the people I play Dice Throne with often make fun of me for saying that I really like card control stuff, because cards are supremely powerful in Dice Throne, pun intended. So, Doctor Strange has a bunch of card control. He's got a side effect called Premonition. He can spend 1 token during his income phase to draw 2 cards instead of 1, and he can spend 3 to draw 3 cards instead of 1. But every time he does that, he's got to take one of his drawn cards and put it on the top or the bottom of the deck. So if you're familiar with that one card from DTA where you draw 2 cards instead of 1, it was like a Orb of Levitation or something like that. You get to draw 2 cards and then pick one to put on the top or bottom of your deck. This is the same thing, except it's turned into a stats effect. So I'm quite excited to take advantage of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, let's move on to the final hero, Loki. Loki is the one hero that I think is going to, like, I don't know, I feel like he's going to, like, be a wild card. Like, people are going to bring Loki into competitive games, and nobody's going to know what to do. So, Loki's got a 2-1-1-1 that 2-2-1-1 dice anatomy. I am getting tired. And he's got a bunch of different stuff going on. His most cool thing is his illusion cards. So he has an illusion status effect that he can spend whenever he's being attacked. And when he does this, he takes 3 illusion cards. One of them says success, one of them says partial success, and another one says fail. He looks at them and then puts them face down in any order. He then tells the opponent which card they should pick, or he just doesn't do that. Then the opponent flips over a card. If they flip over the success card, Loki inflicts Bag of Tricks on them. If they flip over the partial success card, Loki prevents half damage, and if they flip over the fail card, Loki prevents all the damage. Which is the weirdest thing I've ever seen on a Dice Throne homebrew, even after seeing the spell cards. It's just so crazy to see, like, this weird, like, reverse psychology / like, rock, paper, scissors-esque type of trying to think one step ahead of your opponent. Which is, I'm just very excited about this. He's also got a bunch of other little stuff he's doing, but I think the illusions are the main drive of his
That's the start of the show right there, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. His defense isn't very good, except for the fact that if you roll 6, it gives you an illusion, which you can immediately spend.
That is nice.
So his defense is either not so if you roll a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4, it's ranges from mediocre to bad. If you roll a 5, you draw a card, which is not great in terms of actually trying to prevent the damage, but, you know, I'm not going to complain about drawing a card. But if you roll 6, you get illusion, which is very, very good. So, that's the cool thing about his defense, and he's got a bunch of other nonsense happening. And as far as I think we've seen all of his character-specific cards at this point, actually. And all of them are crazy. So, very fitting for Loki. There's not really one thing I can focus on. There's just a lot of stuff happening with him.
That's definitely the appeal for me. You mentioned competitive players are going to be like, oh no, like, because there's so much
Here comes
wildness.
Loki again.
Yeah, exactly. For me, he looks like the kind of character that I'm like, if I lose, I'm still going to have like a really good time, because I'm just going to be messing with my opponent, going to inflicting those spellbounds, doing crazy stuff with Bag of Tricks, and then of course the mind games with illusion. All super fun.
I'm gonna do like the Monty Hall problem with Loki. I'm gonna be like, okay, you picked that card, but now I'm gonna reveal that this card over here was the partial success. Would you like to switch?
I've already like started preparing a little, Princess Bride-esque monologue in my head of, well, obviously you can't pick this one, but you got to pick this. Just kind of doing whatever I can, thinking about how can I prime my opponent. Should I just like subtly leave my finger on top of one as I'm talking to them to kind of prime them,
I was gonna be like, I'm gonna look at the cards and be like, I'm gonna put 2 of them down, and then I'm gonna change my mind and switch them around.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, there's just, like, again, the possibilities are endless, and ironically, Loki kind of breaks the fourth wall, in this sense, because now the game is no longer about 2 heroes fighting each other. It's now about a hero fighting a hero being controlled by a player with a brain.
Right.
Because now the players and their own attempt to fool the opponent and their own thoughts about what's the best way to do this is. It's basically become an interaction between 2 players, and it's honestly the coolest thing I've ever seen in this game.
Well said. Yeah, I think overall, like, again, you know, introducing any kind of new or weird mechanic that just hasn't been in the meta before, to me, is the most exciting thing about Marvel.
This is something that Dice Throne is really good at. They've just, in this season, they've introduced something that we've never seen before, like 4 times over. And this is just like the last spectacular finale to all of that.
Yeah, for sure.
So, that is my spiel about all of these heroes. So, any final thoughts on Loki or on any of these heroes we talked about?
No, I think we gotta start wrapping it up, but like I said, just excited about all the new mechanics.
So, before we wrap up, we've got one quick tip from Amy. Just a little fun factor thing you can do in Dice Throne. The end of every episode. And my tip for the day is getting paid. That's it. Have a great day. No, I'm kidding. Getting paid is an instant card that costs 0 CP, and it says gain 2 CP. A mistake that I see a lot of new players make is that they will draw getting paid, be like, ooh, I'm going to get paid, and then immediately play it. This is not the best way to play getting paid. The best way to play getting paid is to hold on to it until you need the 2 CP. Because in Dice Throne, the only thing that you know that your opponent doesn't know is what cards are in your hand. So the more you can keep that information a secret from your opponent, the more you can take advantage of it. So, for example, if I'm playing against Jared, and I'm going to be like, okay, I'm going to go into my offensive roll phase with 1 CP. Jared probably isn't thinking much, since I only have 1 CP and I can't do that much. But then I roll 3 6s during my offensive roll phase, then I instantly play Getting Paid, because it's an instant card, which increases my CP to 3, and then I spend 3 CP to play twice as wild, which now turns my attack into an ultimate. Jared stares at me angrily. There are a bunch of other uses for this. Even if there's really no downside to holding on to your Getting Paid. If it's about to bring you over your hand limit, you can just play it right before your discard phase and you're good. Yeah, and if your opponent is about to make you discard a card randomly, then you can play Getting Paid as an instant action right before the random discard happens, and you're still good.
This is a great tip. I think it's especially great for new players. This is one that Amy brought up in an earlier episode in Season 0 that really changed my thinking a bit as a casual player of, oh yeah, that there is an advantage to holding on to this. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that with everyone.
Yep, and of course the realizing that instant actions are just that instant, and you can do them whenever you want, is a thing that you can really take advantage of with a couple of heroes that have stats effects that you can spend at any time. And really realizing that you can actually do that is part of being able to take every little advantage that you can get over your opponent. That's all for the first episode of the Dice Throne Podcast. This is Amy and Jared. Have a great day or night or whenever you're listening to this.
That's right. And next time we'll be playing Cursed Pirate versus Shadow Thief, so stay tuned for that. And if you have any questions on characters that you'd like Amy to answer, go ahead and send us an email at dicethronepodcast@gmail.com. Until then, keep rolling 6s.